We have another caller, Kenny from Oklahoma. He's asking, where did the first law schools get their common law? So, Kenny from Oklahoma, do I have your question right?
Yes. Basically, first of all, I just want to tell the cross-examiner that I agree with him, separation of church and state, because I like the idea of render to Caesar what is Caesar's and God what's God. The government has a role and religion has a role. And if you cross these, then you get Thomas Jefferson's problem, where you have maybe a state religion develop. And then the other founding fathers that were religious worried about losing their religious freedom. And that's what a lot of individuals from England came over to America for, was religious freedom. And so I concur with that. But my question involves the origin of common law around in early America that was common during the time of the Revolutionary War. And my understanding is we got our common law here from England, the common laws of England. Well, where does England get their common law? There's two sources. And this is kind of a question-answer thing. I want to see if you know the two sources, because I looked it up. And
okay,
you know
so I don't know the history as well as possibly I should, but I'll give you what I understand and you can educate me. So for our audience, the term common law is a term of art, right? Common law does not mean law that is common. It's a term of art. So common law is judge-made law from long ago in England. It started with the Magna Carta, which was in the, I want to say 1200s. Somebody can correct me on that. I think it's early 1200s. So Magna Carta is sort of the start of saying, hey, we're not going to deal with this whole whatever the king says is law is law. And what spawned from Magna Carta is a judge system, a court system where judges would travel in circuits. That's where we get circuit court judges from. They would travel circuits hearing complaints and cases in the name of the king. And the problem that arose is what we have today, which is if my case about your ox tread upon my crops and I'm in front of Judge Smith, I might get a different ruling than if I'm in front of Judge Martin. So the judges started recording what their rulings would be. All right. So these are called records. And they started adopting common rules of not only how their courts would behave, like, hey, we'll accept this as evidence, but we won't accept that as evidence. But they also started saying, well, if, for example, an early case I read on common law is, hey, you're chasing a fox in a forest, and then another hunter who wasn't chasing the fox comes along ahead of you and traps the fox. Who gets the fox, right? Different judges might come up with different answers to that. But once they started recording their answers, they started coming up with the common law. And everybody, spoiler alert, if you started chasing the fox and somebody else caught it, it was still your fox. That's what they deemed fair. That became the common law. You multiply that by 1 million decisions and we start coming up with some consistency. And sooner or later, people started writing it down. And these rules that would move from court into the legislature at some point, when you start getting into legislatures that are actually doing their job, they would say, you know, this court has come up with this rule. This circuit has come up with this rule. That's a really good rule. We should make it the law, like official law. And then they would pass a statute and it would be even more entrenched. But the common law is just all the, let's call them common sense, judge-made, whatever you want, laws that were in effect and had the force of law at the time. That is the law that was in effect in America when we declared independence. All of the forefathers, all the founding fathers, I should say, of the United States, most of them were lawyers. They knew the common law because they were practicing law at the time. And we said in our founding documents, our law shall be the common law of England. So when I go to study a law, and if it gets down to some common law issue, like who gets the fox, I might have to go back and look at some record from a British court and introduce that in my argument in an American court and cite the founding documents of our country to say, this comes from common law. Here's how common law was practiced back then. Therefore, my client gets the fox. So that is where common law in this country came from, and it still applies today. If an issue has not been legislated and a statute been created to address a particular issue, but that issue was addressed under common law still applies. Does that answer your question?
Okay, that helps, because that case-by-case presentation you gave there certainly points back to the ontological origin of the law. And I was looking for two things just simply stated. One of them was nature, that William Blackstone put in his commentaries on the laws of England. He stated that the two sources are nature and revelation. He specified revelation was Holy Scripture. And what my point was is that culturally, our American culture is definitely culturally Christian to some extent, just like Richard Dawkins made perfectly clear that he was culturally a Christian. He couldn't escape that, being a child and resident of England that had a lot of the Church of England's principles placed in the government and political thought and everything else. So he believed that he was a cultural Christian. He just didn't believe in that God existed, that Christ was the Son of God, or miracles and stuff like that, because that doesn't compute with a science-only view. He was a naturalist, and there's no reason for me to believe that he would believe in those things. But my point is that William Blackstone made it really clear, and his commentaries on the laws of England were used in our first law schools, such as Harvard's first law school, and the laws of England that preceded those law schools. And this was the commentary that explained those laws and how they were used. And you're giving me a good correspondence deal, but I didn't get a causation presentation.
Well, let's clarify. When you use the word causation, you're making a presumption there. Blackstone said that these things come from nature and revelation. Your homework for today is to go find everybody that disagreed with him. So you can't just point to Blackstone and say, Blackstone said it, ergo that's the cause. That was Blackstone's opinion. Okay. Well, when I took law classes, I learned about, hold on a second, hold on. I'm going to mute you here for a second. When I went to law school, I learned about Blackstone. Blackstone is a very well-respected jurist, sort of the jurist of English common law, absolutely. But I don't agree with him that we get it from revelation. I think he was raised in a context of Christianity. Thomas Aquinas, I'm sure Justin can talk to us about things like the church's position on natural law and all that stuff. And Blackstone was almost assuredly, I haven't read his biography, probably steeped in that and would naturally point to that as a cause. But I don't give that any weight. What I give weight to is his reasoning, and the reasoning of all the circuit judges that came up with laws like our federal rules of evidence don't allow hearsay. Why is that? Because our common experience as humans realize that hearsay evidence, the probative value of it, the value that would have as testimony, is vastly outweighed by our common experience that it is extremely unreliable. And therefore, we had a common law rule that hearsay evidence was not admissible under normal circumstances. And then we made a bunch of exceptions where it could be admitted, like it's a dying declaration and things like that. So I agree with all of his reasoning. I disagree with him that it is that way because of revelation. So does that make sense? I want to throw it over to Justin. Did you have any sort of education training into the church's position on things like natural law, or how the intersection of religious law and state law?
Well, we had to take church history in seminary, but we don't get into a lot of specifics on that kind of thing. That'd be like a specialty course that I didn't take. But I'm not really sure, and this is just me personally, I'm not really sure anything in this particular talking point is meaningful. This kind of like saying, well, somebody did something good, that person was a Christian, therefore yay Christianity. That's what I'm kind of feeling right now. But like, we would never accept the argument for any religion. We wouldn't say, the Islamic Empire helped pioneer new mathematic inventions, different types of algebra and things like that, different medicines. But we wouldn't say, yay, Islam. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going to credit Islam with that, right? I think it's kind of
We use numbers in
disingenuous.
America, so therefore we're an Arabic country.
Right. I just think it's disingenuous to say, well, this person that did a thing happened to be part of a religion, therefore the religion has something to do with it.
Go ahead, Kenny.
I believe that, Dane professor of law in Harvard around this time, Joseph Story, said there's never been a period in which common law did not recognize Christianity as laying its foundations. John Adams said
he lied to you.
Basically, what?
He lied to you. Rehnquist, I'll quote Chief Justice Rehnquist said this country, the founding of this country and its laws is based exclusively on Christianity. Well, you need to let people talk here. I know we talked a while, but let us get to you. The founding. All right, well, we're going to hold you off for a second. Rehnquist, much more recent, right? Chief Justice Rehnquist said the Christianity was the foundation of all of our laws in the United States. If you go and read all the history of this, that's just demonstrably false. So instead of quoting people here and there who say things, which is basically, you're making these arguments from authority kind of thing, I want to understand what Justin asked of you, which is, so what? So people who were Christians said they think Christianity caused some stuff. So what? What should we do with that information?
Well, I'm just agreeing with Richard Dawkins that religion has an influence on law and society and government, and the Christianity most certainly had a influence on how these laws started in America. And to say that it's only nature.
But my question is, so what? What do we do with that? How should that inform our actions today?
Okay, well, it helps us get a very clear perspective of where religion's role is involving government without it encroaching on the government. So that supports your side, helps your side. But the fact of the matter is that I don't know too many atheists that have viewpoints on the law or ethics that can't be originate from the principles of religion, especially the Torah. And
the Torah says you can own slaves. We had to unhook ourselves from the Torah.
So what? So what?
you can't say that we're reliant on the ethics of the Torah, and then when I bring up one part of the ethics of the Torah, be like, oh, well, so what? So what if women didn't have autonomy? So what if you could rape a woman as long as she wasn't already betrothed? So what if you could own slaves? So what if you had to burn your daughter alive if you were a priest and she was found sleeping with somebody? So what that if she didn't bleed on a sheet on her wedding night, we get to stone her? So what about all these horrific laws that come from the Hebrew Bible? There's a lot of shit in that Bible that you wouldn't like if we actually turned them into laws.
So, Kenny, I had to mute you again because you're talking. So are you still talking? Did you hear anything that Justin said?
Yeah, I heard all of it.
Okay, so can you respond? But hold on. I want to frame this because you're going off on whataboutisms. So let's frame this. Let's keep this focused. All right.
Oh wow.
Can you please respond to Justin and him pointing out? You said so the Torah, especially the Torah, was an ethical foundation of our law. He pointed out one major problem with it amongst many, and you said, so what? Can you please respond to that with a little more substance?
Yes. In Title 21, criminal law, it's a misdemeanor crime to use the Lord's name in vain, and the way they defined it in law was saying God damn. Now, you can't use the Lord's name in vain according to that law, but that's a modern law, and that's just an example of something that we set aside and we don't worry about enforcing it. No one enforces that law that I know of. And so there's laws that become
do you know why they don't enforce that law? Hold on, Kenny.
We don't need it.
Do you know why we don't enforce that law?
Do we need slave laws? What do we need slave laws?
Kenny, do you know why we don't enforce a law that says you can't take the Lord's name in vain? Do you know why we don't enforce that law?
Oh, I don't have to know. It's just silly to me. And it doesn't have anything to do with anything.
If you don't care about the reasoning behind a point that you yourself brought up, why should we take you seriously?
Oh, baloney. That's not true. I don't agree with that.
You brought up the law. I asked you why we don't enforce it, and you said, I don't care.
You can't escape Christianity when it comes to the formation.
Yeah, we can. Let me ask you something. Can you find me one law in the U.S. that came from the Bible that doesn't exist outside of the Bible or before the Bible? Because most of the laws that you like that come from the Bible already existed in culture prior to the Bible. Can you find one that's not?
Find one that's not in the culture, or find one that is?
Find one that's not already in the culture. Find me a law from the Bible that Americans actually follow that we can't find outside of the Bible somewhere. That was literally thousands of years before the Bible was written. We already had those law codes. Obviously, the most famous of which would be like the Law Code of Hammurabi. The Law Code of Hammurabi doesn't allow you to commit murder either. That was written almost 1,000 years prior to some of the law codes in Deuteronomy.
Are we saying that we got that the law? You're saying that it's unequivocal that we got the laws of Moses from the Code of Hammurabi? Is that what you're telling me? Because I'm
saying that specific law is
obsolete.
That specific law is found in the Code of Hammurabi. It's found in all kinds of law codes. It's not unique to the Bible. It's not even remotely unique to the Bible.
It doesn't matter if it's unique. It only matters if it's original.
No, it's not original. The Code of Hammurabi was written 1,000 years prior to the Torah.
That doesn't mean that's where Moses got it.
I never said that Moses got it. What I'm saying is we don't need the Bible to come up with a law saying that you shouldn't murder each other. The Bible's not vital for that.
Well, I never said that. I'm just saying I'm talking about causation, that we did get common law of England from the scriptures because John Adams said so. And Story said
no one cares about that. Try to focus. The challenge that I gave to you, Kenny, was that can you find a law that we have in America that we could only have got from the Bible? We didn't get it from something outside of the Bible. We don't need the Bible to know that we shouldn't murder each other. Almost all ancient societies already had this on the law books way before the Bible. So try another one.
Well, I don't believe that proves anything.
It does. It demonstrates that the Bible's not necessary for some of these foundational laws. So your point is that somehow we're reliant on the Bible for our laws, but you can't show me a single law we have that we're actually reliant on the Bible for.
Well, why don't you read book 1 of of William Blackstone's commentary and see if he has one.
Why do I care about William Blackstone? I'm asking you, can you find me a single law that is actually reliant on the Bible that I couldn't find from some other culture prior to the Bible? And in fact, more than half of the 10 commandments show up in the 42 confessions of Ma'at. A number of them also show up way before that in the Sumerian righteous sufferer poem. These like cultural things that we find in the Hebrew Bible, like the 10 commandments, were everywhere. In fact, if you read Exodus 22, they literally follow the law code of Hammurabi. You can see that the laws as they're listed in the book of Exodus 21 and 22, they're copying the order of the laws out of the law code of Hammurabi. The Bible is reliant on the law codes that came before it. It didn't come from God. It's a plagiarized law code.
Well, are you familiar with the concept used in the Mosaic literature called inverted parallelism?
There's synonymous parallelism. Inverted parallelism, I think, is something you probably made up. Parallelism in Semitic languages.
It's in the 10 Commandments. It's been demonstrated.
Parallelism in Semitic languages is just when you have a repetition of lines where you slightly change some of the words. You can have an inverted parallelism, sometimes even gets referred to as like a merism. But an inverted parallelism is still the same thing. It's a matter of repetition using opposite ends.
Okay. Well, that was from Justin because I can't tell because my TV doesn't sync with my phone.
Yes, that was Justin.
TV, Okay, Justin, let me comment on that. Inverted parallelism, as it applies specifically to the Ten Commandments, is that the first commandment and the 10th commandment have something in common. The second commandment and the ninth.
Oh, that's not inverted parallelism. That's not what that means.
Yeah, it is.
No, it's not.
That's not the.
It's called a chiastic structure. In Semitic languages, what you're referring to is a chiastic structure.
Yeah, it's chiastic, but it's inverted parallelism is going on there because there's a parallel, and what the parallel is that commandment 1. Am I being heard? Because
you are.
Commandment 1 and commandment 10 have something in common, and what that is a sin or crime in thought. You have thought, word, and deed in the middle of those commandments because it works from the outside in. The middle commandment
that is not remotely true. That's some nonsense that Christians think up to make themselves feel special.
No, it was a Jewish scholar that came up with it.
You keep citing people that say things as if this creates a reality. I want to go back here. We're late. We're going to have to end the call, but I want to go back to our so what question. All right. So let's grant you all the toys. I don't agree with them, but let's give you all the toys to play with and say that Christianity is where we get the majority of modern laws. Let's just say that, even though I don't agree with that. So what? What do we do with that information?
Well, I just wanted you to acknowledge that there's a positive Christian influence on the law and government in relationship to the separation of church and state. The Christian teaching tells us what to do with that, and that even agrees with atheism when they want to separate church and state. And there's the two principal reasons Madison gave for separation of church and state agree. One of them agrees with Thomas Jefferson's concern, and the other one agrees with the more religious founding fathers' concern. And basically,
okay, well, thank you for that comment. I think what you said is you want us to acknowledge something. So I will acknowledge that you're making some interesting points. We are running out of time. I apologize. Justin, do you have any other comments here at the end?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot I can say, but I know we're out of time. But the whole discussion is kind of silly. If the discussion is Christianity influenced the legal system, I agree. It influenced the legal system so that we can keep and maintain slaves. It influenced slave trade so that we had entire states secede from the Union and blame their biblical foundation for that. I mean, you just read the speeches of Jefferson Davis and others. They clearly cite the Bible as the foundation for slavery. So yeah, I agree. Christianity did influence laws. Did some Christians like the separation of church and state? Yes, specifically the Protestants. The Reformation saw a huge push to separate church and state, and that's because the other Christians were murdering the other Christians. The separation of church and state came because Christianity was so violent. Other Christians didn't want to be murdered by other Christians. That's why the separation of church and state happened, because they're violent and they created violent laws. As early as Theodosius II, they were forcefully baptizing Jewish people, and they were literally murdering people that associated with Arius.
Yeah,
the church has always been a murderous entity.
I was going to go to that same point when he brought that up. I'm like, oh, the Christianity is universally in favor of separation of church and state. Tell that to the people who died during the Crusades, right? Like, Christianity spread by the sword. So I'm not sure what you're talking about. Now, we can make arguments about back then versus now, but I would then make the argument of, okay, well, presumably this was God's word only. Are you saying that it was so confusing as to be wrong and people just mistook the Bible to, hey, endorse slavery like it says, spread the faith through the sword like they did, all of these sorts of things? So I think you handled that very well, Justin. Yes, it did influence the law, and we will acknowledge both ends of that. I will acknowledge that morality that exists in Christianity does influence our law, but I also will acknowledge that that morality existed prior to the Torah, right? I think it was Robert Ingersoll was an attorney in the mid to late 1800s who said, and I've pulled this up here because it's right on point, some Christian lawyers, some eminent, some eminent judges have said and still say that the 10 Commandments are the foundation of all law. Nothing could be more absurd. Long before these commandments were given, there were codes of law in India and Egypt, laws against murder, perjury, larceny, adultery, and fraud. Such laws are as old as human society, as old as the love of life, as old as industry, as the idea of prosperity, as old as human love. All of the 10 Commandments that are good were old. All that were new are foolish. And this is from the 1800s. So you can cite Blackstone. I'll cite Ingersoll. I think you can go. I did do a story on this. Go back and find these tablets from 800 years before the Torah, where we have things like, hey, if you murder somebody, this is the punishment. If you steal, this is the punishment. Strangely, there wasn't this thing about like raping women. That was fine. But that's where all the laws tend to come from, and it vastly predates anything in the Torah and is suspiciously duplicative. So I wanted to thank you, Justin, for handling most of that. Kenny, I think you need to do some homework on your ask, right? Asking us to just acknowledge something that I think doesn't have any real world implications is okay, but you refuse to acknowledge the other half of it. You want us to give you credit for the hits and not count you against the misses, and that's just not fair. So, Justin, any other thoughts on that before we wrap up?
Yeah, I love the way you ended that. It kind of reminds me of like some guy who took 100 shots. And he's like, I just made 50 baskets. Well, you also missed 50 baskets as well.
No, I didn't.
But as long as we don't tell people that part.
Let me be Kenny. Say that again. You just missed 50 baskets. That's your line. Go.
You just missed 50 baskets.
So what? That summarizes the call. I made 50 baskets. Well, you also missed it. I made one basket. Oh, did you get a lot of that in your studies? Do you get the teaching coming and with this level of bias or slant?
No. If you go to a good academic seminary or Bible college, they don't really engage in as much of the apologetics. When you go to a seminary, the goal is to give you all the tools necessary to do your own thinking, to do your own theology, to become your own theologian. And so they really focus on Greek, Hebrew, history, and other secondary principles. So that when you pick up the Bible, you can actually interpret it properly. A good seminary, unless it's like super denominationally specific, isn't really interested in telling you what to believe. They want to train you to do everything yourself.
That's a good point. Did you enjoy your time there?
Actually, I really loved it. I loved the learning process. I had a great time at seminary. Even when I was in church ministry, I had a great time in church ministry. I don't have any bad memories from being in the church, but the reality of the matter is I love truth, and it just turns out that Christianity is not true.
Yeah, I agree. I don't see any good reason to believe it's true either. And I have a lot of very dear Christian friends. They're all good people. I don't think they want the government taking over religion. And I think a lot of our callers today were sort of sensitive about that, sort of this so what attitude is sort of betraying of not wanting to recognize that when the rubber hits the road, what matters, in my opinion, is we need to keep our faith out of our public policy making. And that means don't let it get a toehold in government, because we would rather know where certain diseases come from based on science rather than, this person needs an exorcism or something like that, which is where you get when you allow that to creep in.